archaeology.
When people think about archaeologists, the image that I always get is one of Harrison Ford and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and people going around stealing from tombs and looking for treasure. And this really isn't the sort of thing that we're about at all, although I love those movies. Basically, it's a detective story and a way of isolating little pockets of information that can then be turned to your advantage. And although we wish we had Harrison Ford's bank account, we really aren't that kind of archaeologist at all.
Director of the dig, Dr. David Soren of the University of Arizona, is an archaeological sleuth. A year ago, on a hunch, he excavated here. The sweat and toil is inspired, in part, by an ancient account of disaster recorded by an historian in 365 AD. He wrote, "On the 21st of July, preceded by heavy and repeated thunder and lightning, the whole of the firm and solid earth was shaken and trembled." A word-for-word report of a devastating series of earthquakes. Dr. Soren believes the cataclysms destroyed a Roman city here called Corion, sealing it beneath the green crust of earth. Last season, the quake theory paid off. An 800-pound watering trough was discovered, smashed against the wall. Also discovered near the trough were coins, common at the time of the earthquake. This season, the contents of a central pile of debris fascinate Soren's team. Field Director Ron Gardner must supervise its dissection piece by piece.
You go quickly and excavate, and then you have to stop and brush everything carefully, have it photographed, and then you rip it out. Then you do the same thing again.
As the rubble is coaxed apart, an archaeological paradox is at work. As detectives, archaeologists must destroy the scene of the crime to get to the bottom of how the house was structured. To reconstruct this vestige of Corion in the mind's eye, loose debris must be sifted. Then the position of all building materials and contents must be surveyed and drawn before they are removed.
1.770. 1.653.
The nitty-gritty of recording the location of every nail, every detail, falls on the shoulders of John and Peggy Sanders and their computer.
5.766.
The computer mapping system that we have developed can be divided into two parts. The use of a small handheld computer that we take into the field to collect the raw data, and the use of a larger desktop computer back in the office to produce the actual publication drawings. We measured 136 today. That's a centimeter difference. The slump in the wall would take care of that.
For these excavations at Corion, we're producing drawings that will allow us to form composites of various levels of excavation. At different levels, there are different artifacts. Each artifact or each level of artifacts is one drawing, and we can combine or take away on the computer as the director desires.
Still, the structure of the house eludes Soren. With only a precious week of digging remaining, he investigates a 20th century Cypriot town, partially destroyed by landslides and now deserted.
It's very important not only to find parallels for the kinds of architecture that we have, but also to understand what the quality of life was like, what the standard of living was in Corion at that time. It's incredibly valuable for us to give us another window back into time so we can see exactly, or at least near enough, what our site might have been like over 1,600 years ago.
In what resembles a storage room, a central column is discovered, one upright supporting an entire roof. Stone walls in the town closely resemble those at the dig site and seem to confirm Soren's theory of continuity. The theory is borne out when a massive supporting column is discovered under the central debris. Momentum builds as another find comes to light, the remains of a skeleton crushed by a door lintel as the house crumbled. In America, Walter Birkby, a forensic expert, solves murder mysteries. At Kourion, he reads these ancient bones like a book.
During the collapse of the roof or the upper floor, whichever it turns out to be archaeologically, this individual came pummeling through that space, lit on the door lintel, and from all indications, the back of the skull was probably impacted by subsequent falling stone, falling blocks, so that the skull itself was fractured and shattered.
Resin is poured to bind the smashed remains together for later examination. The skeleton builds hope that the team is closing in on the living area of the structure, but a bittersweet discovery awaits them.
What's the coverage on this area? Is it fresco everywhere now?
Fragments of wall fresco, their worth impossible to determine, seem to be everywhere. All digging must stop in the area for the rest of the season. A tough call for Soren, knowing more discoveries lay literally under their feet. In archaeology, all artifacts are treated with equal respect.
I'm wondering if it doesn't dissolve in the ground.
I think it probably does with the alkaline nature of the soil.
And this is just preserved in a little pocket for some reason.
Well, the block was loaded with these snails. You know, so there was open space there. There was way in.
So this is really rare, yeah.
So I think
Everything's in very bad condition, partly because it's been crushed by rubble during the earthquake, and also the soil conditions here have been fairly alkaline, so a lot of the materials that don't survive in an alkaline environment are deteriorated, and there's been a lot of percolation of water because of the air pockets in the rubble, so the water runs down through, and also you've got a very salty environment. You have wall painting that you can't touch. If you just brush it, it just falls apart.
The fresco pieces join thousands of Kourion pottery fragments at a conservation centre a mile away. Here they are cleaned and meticulously photographed for the record. Risking their fragile work for the record, conservationists replace the pots exactly where the fragments were originally discovered at the site. To photograph this recreation and original finds from a bird's-eye view, an arcane contraption called a bipod carries a still camera aloft.
Right, bring it up. Bob, pull. Just let it go, Liz. Okay, hold it there.
The shot weeks before, and now after. The 5-week dig is coming to a close. After over 14,000 man-hours logged this season, Dr. Soren feels he's barely scratched the surface of a city lost in centuries and shrouded in time.
I think for me the most important thing is to begin to form a mental picture of what I think has gone on, and then I pretend I'm there. I go back in time. This is what I really enjoy. Archaeology is particularly important because it gives you a strong idea of where we have been as a civilization. If history or culture or art are important, then archaeology must be one of the links. It's a good way for us to understand our past.
Een serie gemaakt door National Geographic voor iedereen die alles uit het leven wil halen. Het gaat om geloof in jezelf, in je eigen dromen om die uit te laten komen. Het gaat om de moed je eigen weg te gaan en anders te zijn dan de grote massa.
Wow, I can see forever!
Voor iedereen met zin in avontuur, Adventure. Vanavond om 11 uur op National Geographic Channel.
Bellen naar mobiel duur? Onzin! Bel goedkoper met Tele2. Nu nog lagere prijzen. Maar 47 cent per minuut, dag en nacht van vast naar mobiel. Bel gratis 0800 1602. Tele2, spraakmakend goedkoper.
Can a computer think? Can it learn? Can software be developed that acts exactly like the human brain? For 50 years, that's been the question. Today, Nugents are the answer. Using a patented breakthrough in neural network technology, Computer Associates has created the first software that can think. Imagine what this new software can do for your business. Nugents, software that can think.
2/3 van het aardoppervlak is bedekt met water. We spelen erin, bevissen de oceanen en surfen op de golven. Maar de zee kan een genadeloze moordenaar zijn, die land verzwelgt en levens tot zich neemt. Luister naar de verhalen van de overlevenden en de reddingsbrigade in de nieuwe serie Savage Seas, vervolgd vanavond om 10 uur.
The skull of an ape man, a child, does not willingly reveal its secrets to the minds and machines of 20th century man. "60 years of scrutiny have yielded as many questions as answers. Even now, the skull closely guards the mystery of its age. Some 5 million years ago, this arid savanna was a vast receding forest, a damp and wooded stage on which the great drama of human evolution began. More than half a century after Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, the scientific world was presented with an unsettling discovery by a young Australian anatomist working in southern Africa. In 1925, Professor Raymond Dart announced his find, the little skull which would forever change man's flattering beliefs about his origins.
I quite expected that this would cause trouble, because one was dealing with the history of the earth and how man came to be, how he rose. And this had been, at one time, was the sort of thing that his previous peoples had to go through in order to become men. To me, it was reality. Well, it is real.
Raymond Dart had indeed discovered something, but what? The skull had been found at the Taung lime quarry and sent to Dart in a crate. Further mining obliterated valuable supporting evidence which might have verified Dart's claim. The professor insisted that his Taung child represented a new species, a small-brained link between ape and modern man. The scientific elite knew that we arose from large-brained creatures, and that what Dart had in his hands was an ape. The professor said that the skull was at least 1 million years old. They said, nonsense. Dart called Taung proof that man began in Africa. His peers ignored him. Raymond Dart's successor at Witwatersrand University, Professor Philip Tobias.
The discovery of the Taung child in southern Africa came as a complete shock to everyone, because it defied the established beliefs, the fixed ideas of the day. Everyone who was anyone knew at that stage that early man had evolved in Asia. This was in the wrong continent.
One scientist who never held with the fixed ideas of the day was Dr. Robert Broom. The experienced Scottish paleontologist was considered a maverick by his peers, but his brilliance could not be denied.
Broom was the only visitor who knew from his own experience what this was. And when he came in, it was on a table, and he was on his knees looking at this, and so on. And I said, "What on earth are you doing there?" He said, "I'm bowing before our ancestor."
Professor Dart went ahead and named the new hominid species Australopithecus africanus, but more than 20 years passed before it was recognized officially. The search for clues to man's origins shifted to Africa and intensified. Australopithecus africanus is now thought to be even older than Dart suspected. New hominids have been uncovered, among them Australopithecus robustus and boisei, two species which died out, and Homo habilis, the first true man, clever enough to fashion stone tools. The Taung child and Raymond Dart led the way, inspiring a generation of scientists and giving the study of early man new direction.
I believe we all have a terrific innate curiosity. Mammals in general are curious animals. They're curious about their surroundings. We mammals, human beings, are the most curious creatures in creation. And I believe that it is a very compelling urge to find out where we came from.
The men and women digging for answers to that question include Alan Hughes, supervisor of the Sturkfontein site for Witwatersrand University, Dr. Ron Clark, a paleoanthropological specialist at the university, Dr. Elizabeth Verber, a mammal paleontologist with the Transvaal Museum, and Dr. Bob Brain, the museum's director, who has devoted years to uncovering the mysteries of a site called Swartkrans.
What I like about this period of human development is the fact that the hominids, both the early humans and the ape men, were not the dominant creatures as man is today on Earth. They were just simply part of the fauna, and they were certainly subordinate to the big cats that regularly ate them.
The threat from carnivores must have been an absolute major factor in the evolution of man, and the fear at night of where to go. Maybe that's why they were sheltering in these caves, because just to lie down in the open savanna like this with no bush and tree shelter must be terrible. Terrible experience. I'd hate to do it.
These South African cave sites where hominid evidence has been found are really subterranean caverns. Over the ages, soil and water rich with lime seeped in, covering the skeletal fragments and eventually turning them into fossils.
I used to dream that I had found in the deposit 2 or 3 complete skeletons of ape men that had managed to crawl into a corner and die, and were covered with a fine film of lime. Now, this, of course, is not as fanciful as it seems. There is a distinct possibility that one day one might find a whole early man.
Discovered by Robert Broom in 1936, Sturkfontein is the oldest working site in South Africa. Here, pieces of our earliest ancestors have been revealed through a painstaking process of extraction.
Once the material has come out of the cave, then of course we'll bring it back here, and that's when the real work starts, because each individual piece of bone, it's then sorted into broad categories as to what sort of animal it came from, what part of the skeleton it is. One also looks for particular damage marks on the bone, which might be clues to what experiences the animal's body had between death and fossilization. When we started finding these rather interesting worn bones, I thought it would be fun to show them to Professor Dart. And he took one, this horn core that has a rather fine worn point to it, and he said, "What do you think these bones were used for?" And I said, "Well, you know, I suspect they've been used for digging in the ground." And he looked at me rather incredulously. And he said, you know, that's a very unromantic explanation. And he held this point against my ribs here. And he said, you know, I could run you through with that. Professor Dart's interpretation of early human behavior and early hominid behavior has always been very bloodthirsty. It's been highly imaginative and I think often perhaps even calculated to generate controversy. And he's certainly done that extremely successfully.
I believe it would be an insufferable bore if we all believed the same thing. The very fact that there are differences of opinion is another goad, because if you have one belief about this fossil and I have another, and it's the same fossil we're both thinking about, we can't both be right. We may both be wrong. One of us may be right, but it forces one then to go and re-examine the evidence more carefully, to bring new methods to play on the study of the fossils, to see whether we may find common ground ultimately. We've got it how? We've got it like that, but the lower jawbone's not in the picture.
Tomograms of the Taung skull, made by a CAT scan, provide extremely detailed information, unthinkable even 10 years ago.
These new tools are merely embellishing statements that were made by Professor Raymond Dart and Dr. Robert Broom in the 1920s and 1930s. They were good detectives, and they were using their powers of detection to make statements and predictions about discoveries that we would make with further research and further specimens.
There's a very important message that the study of man's evolution has for all of us today, and especially for those living and working in Africa, and that is that these fossils that we've been digging up are not the ancestors of today's African people alone. They are not the ancestors of any one living race of mankind. They are the great-grandfathers of all of us. They are the common ancestors of the whole human race.
What would humanity know of the world if it hadn't been for the people who've discovered? We're not likely to know the future until we know much more about the past, not only on Earth, but elsewhere. And that's what we're doing. We've learnt about the moon during the last few years. These are all things that are obvious to anybody who's got any brains. But most people enjoy not using their brains and filling their bellies. Am I right or wrong?
Na de onderbreking volgt een portret van de mannen die lijf en leden riskeren voor de ingrediënten van de beroemde zwaluwnestjessoep in de Bird Nesters of Thailand.